David?
Yes. I'm trying to share the slide here.
Okay.
Can you see it?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much, Jim, for your kind introductions. And thanks, Julie and her team at the Stimson Center for your invitation to share this panel. Today, I would like to share with you about the religious violence and the moral visions in Myanmar, what I will call it here. It's not possible to understand the current situation in Myanmar without understanding the historical movement of Buddhist nationalism and religious violence in Myanmar. So in order for you to be familiar with that movement, I would like to share with you three different movements, although these three movements are related to each other, but they have each distinctiveness. So the first movement is Buddhist nationalist violence in British colonial period. So in that period, Buddhist nationalism emerged as the anti-Westernism. So they are just trying to protect Myanmar and the people and the nations, so they resist the British colonial period. So this is how the Buddhist nationalist violence in Myanmar began. But when it comes to the second movement, which I'll call it here, Buddhist nationalist violence in a post-colonial period, or maybe we can put post-independence period, the shift is slightly different. In that movement, Buddhist nationalism emerged as the anti-Buddhist movement, or maybe anti-non-Burma movement. So Myanmar has 135 ethnic groups, and the Burma is the majority ethnic group, and there are some other ethnic minority like Chin, Kachin, or many other ethnic minority groups. So in that second movement, Buddhist nationalism emerged as the anti-non-Burma or maybe non-Buddhist movement. So what is interesting in that movement is that I will put it here, the word make Buddhism great again. As some of you might know, many these Buddhist military leaders in Myanmar are in fact inspired by Donald Trump's slogan here, make America great again. And also in Myanmar, they are trying to make Buddhism great again because they feel that Buddhism was declining during the British colonial period. So they are trying to make Buddhism great again by using Buddhism as a dominant religion and other ethnic minority religions such as Islam or maybe Christianity, assimilated religions in that context. And particularly in that second movement, we can see the relationship between the Buddhist national elites and the grassroots Buddhist movement, what we call Mapata. So here you can see the picture. So Mapata is a grassroots Buddhist nationalist movement, and they use some violent actions, and then they also speak hatred against some other ethnic minority groups such as this Rohingya and some Christian groups. So the military government protect them and then use those grassroots Buddhist nationalists as a way how they are trying to speak against other minority group in Myanmar. So I can put here, there might be three main characteristics of that nationalism. The first is definitely political dominations. And the second is the ethnic minority assimilations. And the third is religious discriminations. I think that is a really significant in Myanmar. I myself, I belong to the Chin ethnic minority group, and religiously I'm a Christian. So we have to face that the religious discriminations in Myanmar because Buddhism is a dominant and the state religion. So for example, practically speaking, that religious discriminations begins in your national identity card. So in Myanmar, you have the national identity card, you have to put religions, Christianity, or maybe Islam, or maybe Buddhism. And then you have to put ethnicity, Chin, Karen, or Kachin. You have to put those ethnic and religious identity in your card. So when you apply the job in the society, they will look at your identity card. If you are not a Buddhist or if you are not a Burma, you will face that religious discrimination. That is a real in Myanmar. So now let's move to the third movement. It's what I will call it all Buddhist nationalism in the new coup. So in this third movement is is not just about the identity conflict here, in my view, that is also about the ideology conflict. So in that third movement, the conflict is not just between the majority Burma Buddhist group and other religious minority group. In this third movement is the conflict between Buddhism against Buddhism. The Buddhists, those who support military government, and the Buddhists, those who support democratic movement. So this conflict is broader than the second movement. So that is something interesting to me. So in that case, the conflict is among the Burma majority group themselves, depending on who support the military government and depending on who support a national unity government, which is a new government to confront the military government. So because of that, the nationalist ideology, religions, and violence is significant in Myanmar today. If you can see here some picture, these 6 pictures. The first picture here on the left side, 17 civilians, those who resist against the military government, was burned by the Buddhist army. And here the second picture, 17 houses in my home state, Chin State, have been burned down. And then the third one is a Christian pastor. He was killed by the army soldier, and then they also stole his wedding ring here in his finger. They cut his finger and they stole his wedding ring. And here you can see in this the last 3 pictures. Those are the pictures that I recently took from the local journalists in Chin State. So as you might know now, the military government is putting a lot of pressure on the people of Chin. There might be many reasons why they are doing that, but in my view, partly because the Chin armed group is the first group ever to recognize and to join NUG. So that might be one of the reasons, and they are trying to eliminate and all the people in my home state, and they're destroying some private houses, and they burn down some church buildings, and you can see here in this picture, it says a lot. So this is how this religion violence are related in Myanmar. So in that context, how do the civilians resist? So what is interesting about this, the current movement in Myanmar, is that the rise of the new military coup creates the opportunity of the interreligious and inter-ethnic solidarity for democracy movement in Myanmar. So as you might know, the Rohingya issue has been a crucial issue in the recent years. But when that happened, other religious and other ethnic groups do not share a strong solidarity with them. But because of this, the rise of the new military coup, it creates the opportunity of interreligious, inter-ethnic solidarity for democracy. So Muslims, Christians, and other Buddhists and Hindus, they come together and they share their interreligious solidarity, and they fight against the military government as their common enemy. This is something important to remember about this, the current movement in Myanmar. And they also believe that this fight is not just the fight between the military government and Aung San Suu Kyi and her party, but this is the fight between truth and untruth, or in Buddhist, they call it Dhamma and Adhamma. So this is the fight between truth and untruth. They are not trying to see it as the fight between military government and Aung San Suu Kyi. They are trying to go beyond this fight. So this is how they call it. So especially truth is important to be addressed today here. In the context of the junta government, truth becomes a victim. It's very hard to it's very hard for them to acknowledge what is truth and what is wrong. They're always trying to hide the truth. So that is something important. You might have seen some news recently. The military junta has released almost 3,000 political detainees and prisoners 2 days ago, but they released, and then a few hours later, they arrested some of them again and they put them in a jail. So it's very, very hard to understand what they understand about this truth. So truth becomes the victim in this context. And what I would like to share with you is also about the way how civilians in Myanmar resist this military government. I can put it, there are 2 major ways of resisting against this government. The first is non-violence. So when the coup emerged, they resist the military coup by protesting on the streets. So you can see here 2 young ladies they were the first two young women who led the first largest public protest against the military government in Myanmar. Two of them were recognized by Time magazine as I think among the 100 most influential people. That's very good news for two of them. So they led the first anti-coup movement in Myanmar. So they used this a non-violent way of protest against the coup, but later on, the military government used violent crackdowns on the peaceful protesters. So that led to a violent way of resisting against the government. So you can see here the second picture. You can see here some people with the hunting guns. These pictures are from my hometown, because my hometown has been very known for that Dumi revolutions in Myanmar. Dumi means the hunting guns. So the civilians do not have any other way for their self-defense. So they use hunting guns. They use some knife for their self-defense. So in that case here, I will put it, there are two methods of resisting against this government. So some other international community might condemn that is too violent, but these civilians feel that they don't have any other options. And this situation is not created by the civilians, but this situation is created by the military government themselves, because they use a violent crackdown on the non-violent protesters. That's why the civilians take up some hunting guns and some knife and even some stones for their self-defense. So in that kind of resistance against a coup, what I will also say is that the current movement is also trying to go beyond Aung San Suu Kyi method of nonviolence, because many people feel that only nonviolence is not effective enough to defeat this military government. That's why they use both nonviolence and violent ways of resisting against a coup. So because of that fight, some civilians becomes the victim. That really is the challenge. And I believe that this might also be our further discussion afterwards. So here you can see some pictures. When this fight happens, many civilians are not safe to live at their house, not safe to live in their towns. Some of them fled to jungles. Some of them fled to the neighboring state. For example, Mizoram state in India, which is the closest state to Myanmar, especially Chin and Kachin. So you can see them here, these pictures. They fled to the jungles. They live in jungle. And this is now the rainy season in Myanmar. It's very, very hard for them to survive living in the jungles, actually. You can see them here. And you can see here, the second and the third picture, you can see some pigs, right? Some animals in two towns in my home state. So my hometown has become under martial law since May 13th. And many people fled to jungles and the nearby villages. They just left their animals behind in their town. You see some animals. And the other picture is also the pictures of some animals in Tan Tlang. So Tan Tlang has also been under this serious attack by the military coup. So they just left their animals behind, and many human beings fled to jungles and the neighboring villages to seek safety. So this is really, really hard for them to survive. And especially in my hometown, the military government blocked even some humanitarian assistance. They block all the roads. So they don't allow the humanitarian assistance to go to my hometown and to the villages to support medical care and other things. They always arrest those kind of humanitarian assistance. So that really is the challenge. And I hope some UN could do a more effective way to how to protect those civilian people, those who are seeking safety in the jungles and the villages. Let me move to the next one. So as a scholar, my main interest is in how religion might play a role in peace and democracy. That really is my interest. So that is my question here. As I mentioned earlier, so Buddhism is not a violent religion, but the military Buddhists are violent people. So that's why I'm trying to use a paradoxical approach to this Buddhism, right? So to many people in the West, Buddhism is a religion of peace, meditations, compassions. But if you look at what is happening in Myanmar, as well as in Sri Lanka, many Buddhists becomes violent because of their nationalist ideology. But it doesn't mean that all the Buddhist people in Myanmar are violent. They are non-violent people. There are a lot of people. So that's why my interest is to approach Buddhism paradoxically, right? So my question here is Buddhism a democratic religion? It depends on how we understand democracy. But in my view, Buddhism is a democratic religion based on the individual respect of human rights, human dignity, and self-autonomy, and human rights and freedom. All this kind of thing is related to the democratic principle of democracy, Buddhism in Myanmar. And also, I feel that seeing Buddhism as a democratic religion is also helpful in the context where many Buddhist nationalists stand against Western ideology. So we need to indigenize, or we need to contextualize Buddhism as a source for how we should rethink about democracy and peace in Myanmar. So if that is the case, then our role is to continue to confront Buddhist nationalist ideology and showing that Buddhism itself has some democratic principle of moral teaching. That really is important. That's why my interest is in a mutual liberation. So liberation is not just about the oppressed, but also about the oppressors. We need to liberate them morally. We need to teach them, equate them that their religious teaching is some good thing. They have to practice what their religious teaching. So that really is my interest. So it's important to talk about the mutual liberation of both the oppressors, the military leaders, and the oppressed in Myanmar. And here is also another interesting that I would like to bring. Do the ethnic majorities and ethnic minorities share the same vision of freedom and democracy in Myanmar? I think the answer is yes, but we can also argue that some ethnic majority like the Bama, their vision is to liberate only from the military coup. But for other ethnic minorities, that liberation is not enough. Their liberation is also from this Buddhist nationalist movement. We really want to talk about this, what I would call it, the double vision of liberations for the ethnic minority group in Myanmar. So in order to that happen, we need to go beyond both the military coup as well as Aung San Suu Kyi. So many ethnic minorities, of course, Aung San Suu Kyi she is a champion of human rights. She's a champion of hope for many, many people in Myanmar. But in the case of this Rohingya and other ethnic minority group, Aung San Suu Kyi also have some limitations, right? So as we know, she went through the Netherlands and then, defend what the military government is doing to Rohingya issue. So many ethnic minority critique Aung San Suu Kyi for their position, right? So that's why now many ethnic minority groups in Myanmar trying to go beyond both the coup and Aung San Suu Kyi. That really is the ultimate vision of many people in Myanmar. So that's very important. Let me go to the concluding point. Does Myanmar have the democratic future? I think the answer is yes, but it also depends on how we continue resisting against this military coup. In my opinion, we need two movements, which already have happening now, both internal and external movement. So what the internal movement in Myanmar is quite impressive enough. So we also urge the international and the external community to recognize the National Unity Government, which is a new government formed on 16th of April. So today is the 6th anniversary of this NUG, new government. So this NUG was formed to confront the military government. So that's very important. And last Friday, ASEAN, Association of Southeast Asian Nations, make a good news that they did not recognize the military government as legitimate government, and they decided not to invite the military government leader to attend the forthcoming ASEAN meeting. That's very good news. And also 2 weeks ago, European Parliament has decided to recognize NUG government as legitimate government, not a military government. So that is very helpful. And I also urge some other international community to do the same thing, to recognize NUG as the legitimate government in Myanmar. And this NUG is even more inclusive ethnically and religiously. And even in terms of gender issue, there are more women in this new leader. In the military government leaders, there are no female leaders. So that's very important. So I urge the international community to recognize NUG as a legitimate government in Myanmar. And the second is that we urge the international community to advocate for freedom of Myanmar people. So please continue. I know that many of you might have already done this advocacy work, but please continue advocating for the freedom of Myanmar people. And the third is more practical. So many civil servants start working in the government, which is very helpful. That's why now the military government cannot run properly. So this is very helpful. But since they don't get any salary from the government anymore, we also urge international community to support the CDM movement. So help them, support them financially and in other practical ways. So this is something that I would like to offer, and I believe they will have more discussion afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Hafsat, we're over to you now.
Hi, everybody. My name is Hafsat again, but I don't have to introduce myself. So, well, I'm just gonna go straight to the point, because I've told my story, 1,000 or more times. And at this point, my focus is just looking and dwelling into the fact that the unrest is still happening, even maybe worse than before, but in a dynamic way that nobody is looking at actually. So Nigeria, from the north to the south to the west to the east, has a plague of violent conflicts, especially these days. The violent conflicts that have been troubling Nigeria for more than since before I was born. So most of it is the ethnic conflicts, the religious conflicts, the political conflicts, terrorism, militancy, youth restiveness, electoral violence, so on and so forth. So these have compounded the situation in Nigeria, where it's really hard to sieve out what conflict to work on first in order to have peace in the country. There are more than how many people in Nigeria? Over 2 billion people in Nigeria or so, and over 400,000 languages. So the dynamic situation of us being a overpopulated country with so much to deal with has a lot to do with the conflicts that are happening in my country, in Nigeria. Now, as we know, over the years, one of the most famous conflicts has been the Boko Haram insurgency. The Boko Haram insurgency has disturbed everybody in the world because of how it, perpetuated and how many people have lost their lives or have been displaced till today, including me. But I'm not displaced anymore, of course. But we can also say that, one thing that is basic to Boko Haram insurgency is the fact that they know that they are getting attention. They're getting the attention they want, and they are still getting the weapons. Till date, I have no answer. And unfortunately, the Nigerian government, I don't think, has answers as to where they get their weapons from or whatever they use their amenities from to carry out this conflict and this violence and kill people. This is one thing that has been lingering on a lot of minds in Nigeria. Like, how do they get their weapons and where do they come from? People might say it may come from the international communities. People might say it may come from the Nigerian government, because nobody trusts the Nigerian government these days. But where does it come from? If we can tackle where it comes from, and to say a Nigeria that is called the giant of Africa and has a vast majority of its people educated and working class people, but still we cannot place a hand as to where these people are from now or are based, you know, and carrying out their conflicts. My thing is, I'm from the northeast part of Nigeria. And to be precise, I'm from Goza. Goza local government is where Sambisa is located. Now, if as a child, I could climb the mountains and go through the rainfalls and, you know, explore the natural beauty of that area, there's no way I could cover it or anyone could cover it. But with satellite these days, with technology these days, we still ask, how are they not, you know, identified? Where are they? Where are they? Like, there's no way that, you know, it doesn't add up to us. A lot of people, especially to me, it doesn't add up. And this is my distrust with my government in Nigeria. But we've tried to work with them to see, you know, the factors and risks for, you know, this religious related crisis, as the topic discloses here. One of the things that we may say is that we have a lot of people who are educated. And I've done so many research, like not research just sitting at my desk and calling people. I've knocked on doors. I've gone to villages with bare feet. I wrap this on my head. It will be so hot some days that I take it off, and I'm a hijabi. But I take it off so I can, you know, be comfortable and ensure I cover the basis of where nobody else or a few people want to cover, and just ask the basic questions of, what is the problem? Why are your sons and daughters tilting towards these terrorists? Why are they joining the Boko Haram insurgency? And why are you, as a 60-year-old woman, making food and providing food for these terrorists? You're 60, you're 70, a woman, a grandmother. Why are you aiding them? So much to say that when you see them and you talk to them in such a way that you're feeling them, you're picturing the whole story they're telling you, you would actually know that a lot of them are not really terrorists. They're not. There are many of them joined because of poverty. The poverty in my country is outrageous, as it is in other African countries and many more countries. It is outrageous. The government has no plan in place to help the poverty alleviation in Nigeria. So what do? They turn towards violence, just as the case of the recent kidnappings and the farmers and herders conflict that is going on. Even family members these days, they go to these kidnappers and actually negotiate with them to kidnap their own family members for money. And then they continue to live their lives as if though they did nothing. And because, of course, there is no accountability and there is no security enough to excuse my child. Okay, go away. So there is no security enough to get these perpetrators, you know, accounted for. So there's more rape, there's more violence, there's more people joining. Even after trauma counseling, even after some psychosocial therapy, they still join. Now, why people like me run away? Maybe it's because I'm educated. Maybe it's because the lineage of my family, my whole family is educated. But who's not to say that a lot of educated people are among these terrorists, or some educated people are the terrorists themselves? I've seen them. So we have them. So the cause, my thing is, the cause for this thing, the conflict is, the culprit is, I keep saying it, the culprit is poverty, okay? Poverty, poverty, poverty. You might go to college and have your degree in whatsoever and know your religion preaches peace. I've read a lot of religions. One common thing I know about religions is that they preach peace. So why are you tilting towards violence? Or why are you taking the verses or the surahs or the ayats out of context? Why are you creating innovations in the books where there's none, just to validate the mayhem and the killings and the evil acts that you are causing, only because they want fame? The Nigerian government and the Nigerian politicians have made it in such a way that I get into office, I grab what I can, get a lot of money, take my kids abroad, even though they can be educated in Nigeria. When I'm sick with the slightest headache, I run to Dubai or Egypt or America or UK, just to undermine our own country. So when people see that and they can't even get the basic health care, and women are giving birth, on other women's blood who have just given birth, and children same needles are recycled in the hospital, like there is everything, the educational system is dilapidated. What do? They turn to violence, because the extremists, at a point, Boko Haram were paying these people a good sum of money. And believe it or not, at a point, through research and some of the Chibok girls that I worked with, what I've heard from them is they were treating the girls that they kidnapped and married well. So a lot of them that were, back, they ended up going back. They ended up going back to Boko Haram only because they saw nothing in what they were doing. It might be because, the communities did not accept them as well. Yes. But one thing you hear from their mouths is that, these people, they might be doing what they're doing, but I'm treated like a queen. One particular girl told me that it's still confusing me that, they have created people in their society, the Boko Haram society, where they are so stone cold hearted to see people being killed, but because I'm being treated well, I'm gonna stay. It does not resonate with me, because I am a person who believes that you fight for another human. I laid there so that a 9-year-old girl would not be raped, would not be gang raped and die. I came from working and I heard this girl screaming, and I went to the uncompleted building and I laid there flat and I told them to take me instead of her. So if I have this in my head as just human, I keep questioning the humanity we have in connection with the religious values that most of us have gotten, the good religious values that we have gotten and we still study. And we understand that, as a human, you just look at being, human first and not being a terrorist. So I can tell you 1,000 things about the atrocities and the factors and what we can do. But the main thing, everything has to be labeled and taken one step at a time, because it has failed. It has failed woefully when a lot of NGOs, including my NGO, we try to compress the whole issue, the whole risk factors, and look for a solution. They never work. They never work. So we have to take them step by step and think outside the box. We have to do that. These people are smart. They got tactics. They know what they're doing. They live among us. So what are we doing with this information that we have? We're not digesting the information. No, we're just going into war with them head on, without digesting the information and researching what actually we can do to make it work. That's why a lot of the talks they have had with the government has failed. Now, in Nigeria, a lot of people will tell you Boko Haram is maybe number 2 on their list when it comes to violent extremism. But the number 1 conflict now that people are facing is the kidnappings and the herders and farmers conflict. Climate change has an impact on what's going on with the recent conflicts in Nigeria. What are we doing about climate change? What are we doing? Boko Haram has killed so many people that our soils are bad or whatever. But what are we doing to revitalize our soils? What are we doing to get a lot of youths to jobs and farming again? We do not have none of that. We have the Ministry of Agriculture in Nigeria. We have the Ministry of what? The Ministry of what? The chairman of this, the committee of that. What are they doing apart from sitting on the table? And these are questions a lot of Nigerians are asking. And lastly, I do not want to end, my own part of the discussion without recognizing the Mossab in the Southeast, the OPC in the Southwest, the MEN, the NDPV, as other hosts of conflict in Nigeria. They may have been laying low because of what's happening in the North, but we cannot also ignore them, that they are still doing what they're doing. I would like to stop here, and I'll take any questions as they come. Thank you.
Thank you, Hafsat. I think we'll pass on to Asa and then Julie, and then come back to questions. Asa, question?
Yes, thank you so much. I just first, I have a PowerPoint presentation, but I'm not sure if should I go with that or should I just do it without it, what people would prefer. It's not very long, so.
PowerPoint is fine, Asa.
Okay, I will. Let's see. Do you see the PowerPoint? Just want to make sure. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. 1 second. Yes, thank you so much for this opportunity and inviting me here today. And it's very hard to talk after Hafsat, after her very powerful presentation. But what I wanted to do, what I was invited to do, is to provide a little bit of a framework in how the role of religion is in conflict and how it can be a resource for building peace. And so when I came into the field of conflict resolution over 20 years ago, and I was really interested in understanding the role of religion, the first thing I was told as a field was that religion, especially looking at religion from a perspective of as a resource, was not something that was relevant to conflict resolution. And there was this idea of there's a secularization, conflicts are so much we have to understand the secularization of the society, etc. So, but increasingly we have realized, especially in the new millennium, that religion is still a very important, powerful source of inspiration for many people. In fact, the Pew Research Institute had done a study in 2015 and identified the 21st century would be the century of religions come back because so many communities.
Hey, Isa.
Yes.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you. I believe we are not able to see your PowerPoint at the moment.
Oh, okay.
It looks like it's either just a black box, or I don't know, maybe we can try to get that sorted before you continue. Again, I'm very sorry.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much. I think I by mistake pause it. Is it working now?
Yes, yeah, we can see it now.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
No problem.
So as the examples of Myanmar, Nigeria, and many other conflicts around the world shows us, religion is an important aspect of many of our current day conflicts. And so when we look at these conflicts, we identify them as ethno-religious conflicts, which has a certain set of characteristics. But I think I'd like to really sort of re-emphasize what Hafsat was talking about, that religion is rarely the main cause of these conflicts. There's deep-rooted grievances, experience of colonialism, poverty. There's so many other reasons that fuel these conflicts. But the unique nature of religion, which I'll touch upon in a second, provides legitimacy to many of these atrocities and conflicts. And in these ethno-religious conflicts, we see that oftentimes the parties to the conflict are defined along ethno-religious lines. These conflicts are more intrastate rather than interstate conflicts. They're much more intractable. They're harder to resolve through traditional means. And they include many non-traditional actors, such as insurgencies, extremist groups, and civilians. You don't always have two militaries fighting with each other. And they take place in communities where parties live in close proximity with each other and very high civilian casualties, injuries, and trauma. So, and also many of these conflicts take place in fragile communities, and many of them are impacted by the experiences of colonialism, etc. So when we look at this, the role of religion in these conflicts, we see that religion is can serve both as a divider and a connector. When we think about religion as a divider, we're really looking at the destructive ways in which religion can be used to divide communities, sort of frame issues and factors in ways in which religious motivations can be used to mobilize people to fight along certain ideologies. When we think of connectors, we think of religion as a potential resource for peace, brings out values, myths, rituals that would bring people together, such as compassion. And so when we are really trying to respond to religiously motivated conflicts, first, we really need to understand these non-religious aspects, but also understand what specific role religious traditions and practices play in that conflict. So we have to design our approach that is a sort of appropriate and unique to that context. And if the religion is being used to create a culture of violence, we have to understand how we can sort of re-engage religion to make it more of a culture of peace. So that means transforming the conflictual relationships based on violence and hatred by engaging new actors, such as religious actors, faith-based actors, who may have more legitimacy and credibility in those communities. And when we look at different elements, different dimensions of religion, we really need to also identify what aspects of religion are being used for promoting violence and atrocities, and what can we do to promote peace-building qualities of religion. So we can see religions can be seen as a set of ideas. All religious traditions have usually a shared set of teachings, doctrines, norms, values, myths, and stories. And these can be sort of used to either sort of justify violence or to promote peace. Religion as a community. So we could see whether a religion as a defined group of people and believers, how does that provide individuals with a sense of identity, with a sense of belonging, something that is bigger than themselves, which can be a very important motivator at times of conflict and at times of peace. Religion as an institution. So we look at whether in this particular conflict, is religion as an institution serving as a divider or a connector? So this means we look at the formal structures, leaders, and organizations associated with the religious communities and what role do they play in conflicts. And then we can look at the religion as symbols and practices. So like many religious traditions have visible lived manifestations of the religion. This could be from buildings to dresses to ceremonies and to rituals. So and finally, religion as spirituality. How does religious tradition as a personal experience can provide a sense of purpose, connectedness to something greater than oneself and one's community? How can be a strong sense of motivation? So we really also, in order to address this dual nature of religion in times of conflict, we really need to understand the nature of religion itself. But religion is always hard to define. It's very complex. Within each religious tradition, there are different interpretations, different dynamics. And one of the so just having a religious solution just is not sufficient to engage religion as a peace-building tool. We really need to understand how all these different elements of religion are being used and for the psychological, economic, political aspects as well. So, but one thing that we know is that religion informs the way people think, act, how they perceive their interests, how they make sense of the world in which they live in, even how they make sense of the hereafter. So because of this, many political and religious leaders as well as extremist groups have used religion to mobilize populations. So it becomes really important for us to understand when we think, for example, within the context of extremism, we talk about push and pull factors. Push factors are those structural elements that sort of create the conditions of individuals to be drawn to these groups. And the motivations and individual reasons why people join are usually identified as pull factors. So what aspect of religion is being used by these groups to sort of draw people to that group or to organization or to the conflict? And we also have to understand how religious traditions give meaning to one's identity, how it provides a sense of locatedness in the, not only in the geographical and social context, but in the cosmological, metaphysical space as well. So religious rituals and myths are very important, powerful ways to communicate, and they help us communicate emotions that are hard to articulate but in words. So how can we engage? What are some of the rituals that are available for inspiring people to sort of use for peace building aspects is very important. So the question is, so why and when do we engage religious actors? So a couple of elements is that first, religious tradition, religious leaders can provide legitimacy to the process, and it may mobilize people to come to meeting or just to sort of rethink their approaches. Bringing in religious sources such as holy texts, moral, spiritual, and other resources to the peace process can really inspire people a sense of engagement. We can see this in various different peace building initiatives based on faith-based actors. The religious rituals and values such as forgiveness, patience, mercy, accountability can be used to facilitate managing and healing deep injuries and traumas, in addition to transforming relationships between the opponents. And the religious involvement can help and prepare not only the parties, but also the conflict resolution practitioners and diplomats for much more proactive roles in transforming the conflict, even if the mediators, for example, are not from the same religious tradition, but understanding the dynamics of religion can help them rethink their strategies and find more appropriate ways to engage the parties. Religion also brings a spiritual basis for transformation of the relationships, and can also compensate for the mechanistic and instrumental conflict resolution models that may feel cold and distant to some groups. And the values, religious values, can inspire people to look inside, create a sense of accountability. Religious traditions also provide a set of vocabulary. So the religious leaders and faith-based organizations bring a certain set of resources that makes them unique in some sense. They can bring religious and other of legitimacy. They may have a better understanding of the spiritual and other sensibilities of the parties which they can engage. They can bring in financial and institutional human resources that may not be available to secular or more traditional conflict resolution practitioners. Through their religious spiritual resources, they may have healing trauma and injuries, so resources to heal trauma and injuries, which is really important during the reconciliation phase, which is central to a sustainable peace building process. Religious leaders also have a set of leverages and power sources that may not be available to others. This could be spiritual leverage as well as community leverage and special authority in their communities. And they may be able to draft committed people depending on their role in society. And what some of the research that we've done in different parts of the world, we have identified, as I was part of the Salam Institute for Peace and Justice, one of the things that we have observed was that religious leaders and faith-based actors often have been successful in altering behaviors, attitudes, and negative stereotypes and mind frames by engaging these resources. And they have been able to provide ways to help people come to terms with the experiences that they had and help them feel sort of help them heal their traumas. They also, through their sermons, through other ways, they can contribute more effectively, disseminating ideas on peace, justice. So we have examples from different parts of the world where sort of using radio programs, engaging the mosques or churches to distribute these ideas. Sometimes, not always, they can also challenge traditional structures within the context without really stepping beyond the boundaries of their faith tradition, but they may be able to sort of identify elements of tradition that may not be relevant or that may not be part of the religious tradition. Because of their role in the society as middle range leaders and sometimes high range leaders, they may be able to reach out. We find them in many occasions reaching out to the government and having access to both grassroots and the top level leadership. And one thing that I would say is because of all these unique qualities of religion, many governmental agencies have been engaging religious actors. But one of the challenges that we have experienced or seen is that when we engage faith-based actors, many of them happen to be males in many societies, in many religious traditions. But so my most current research has been looking at the role of how can we engage faith-based women and women religious actors. And so that's one of the areas that I've been working over the last couple of years, especially with the Women, Peace and Security Institute here. So one of the things that we see, a lot of the women's issues have been addressed from very secular perspective. Women, Peace and Security agenda has been much more secular oriented. And many sort of religious faith-based peace building has been focused on male clergy and religious leaders. So one of the most sort of forgotten or unsort of recognized group of people that have a unique capacity to address these conflicts are faith-based women. And these groups have certain skill sets and resources and strengths that are not available to secular women because of the context. Usually the woman secularism has been seen as a threat to many of these societies. And if you're trying to engage religiously motivated violence, you really need to engage religion. And therefore you need to engage women who are coming from a theologically informed background. So many faith-based women can engage men and women through theologically informed narratives and approaches. They can more legitimately approach these issues. And this gives them an opportunity to conduct training, education approaches rooted within their own religious frameworks. And so they could also collaborate much within understanding their cultural context, collaborate with male religious leaders in their context so they could capture a number of different areas. And another important aspect of their work is that they have strengths that are not available to male religious leaders. For example, they tend to work with more women victims of violence, as well as women who have been engaged with extremist groups, for example, but also understand women's unique needs and concerns. It's now we have come to the realization that women and men are impacted differently in times of conflict and they have unique strengths. Engaging sort of other women as mothers, as sisters, as teachers. These women can sort of create programs for early warning mechanisms for understanding conflict, as well as radicalization. They could work with vulnerable children. And because they are seen as non-threatening, they often, which may sometimes be seen as lacking power, many of these women see that as a source of their power, which gives them opportunities, trust, and opportunities to talk to groups and individuals that may not be sort of as willing to talk to others. So some of the unique aspects or the work that they do, many women of faith, is they work and focus on relationship building. They understand their context and they usually frame their approaches within that context. And their strategic invisibility, which is their sort of not being in positions of traditional power, gives them this invisibility, yet this invisibility provides them with unique opportunities, and they address issues related to women that may not often be sort of addressed. So very finally, I just wanted to say that it is very important for us to engage religious traditions and peace building as a complementary process, but not forget to address non-religious dynamics of conflicts, as Hafsat was saying, poverty and the grievances. They have to be done in a collaborative, complementary way. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Isa. Julie, it's over to you now.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you to my fellow panelists for sharing their research, ideas, and very moving personal experiences here today. And I also appreciate the explanation that has already aptly been made between why religion matters in relation to atrocity prevention. So as Jim mentioned earlier, I'll be speaking today to the findings and recommendations from a report Stimson published earlier this year on violence based on religion or belief and the options for action at the United Nations. So firstly, I'll start off by talking about what is the problem, what are the trends when it comes to religion and violence, and what does the data tell us at the global level? And then secondly, what can the United Nations Security Council, a body charged with maintaining international peace and security, do better to address and prevent religion-related violence and atrocities? So let's start first with religion-related violence. As the data shows, it is a problem in plain sight that is systematically not being addressed. At the global level, in the last decade, we've seen an increasing or sustained trends in religion-related violence, which is again widely under-recognized by the international community, specifically at the United Nations. And these upward trends are across religious and belief communities, not confined to just a few groups. They're across majority and minority religious groups and beliefs. Now, from the data released by the Pew Research Center between 2007 and 2019, which is the most current and the most robust source of quantitative data we currently have access to when it comes to government use of force and social hostilities relating to religion, we can see a series of phenomena. One, there has been a sustained and very strong rise of government force based on religion or belief. And there are, of course, a few standout cases in here, namely China, Myanmar, Syria. In 2019 alone, these three contexts had over 10,000 recorded incidents of government use of force alone. There's also been an increase in casualties, so death of civilians from religion-related terrorism, even though we can see that empirically, the absolute number of countries that have been experiencing religion-related terrorism appear to be on the decline the last few years. From 2007 to 2019, though, the number of countries that have experienced a high level of religion-related terrorism that results in 50+ injuries or deaths per year increased by over 350% during this time period, a little over 10 years. Examples of perpetrators, which I'm sure we all know well, include ISIS in Iraq and Syria, the Islamic State in Khorasan province in Afghanistan, which these past few weeks has been hitting the international headlines with suicide bombings targeting Shia mosques, resulting in significant death tolls each time. Al-Shabaab in Somalia, and as has already been mentioned today, Boko Haram in Nigeria. This is just to mention a few. But of course, this is by far not the only case of religion-related violence or risks that we have for atrocities. There's also mob violence based on religion or belief that has been a sustained problem this past decade. And we've seen it in India, Ethiopia, Sri Lanka, Syria, and Tanzania, to name a few. And the problem is that no one's really talking about this disorganized conflict, which doesn't fall into the traditional category of armed conflict or war, which tends to receive all the focus. We've also, in the past decade plus, seen a continued rise in property damage and harassment based on religion, as well as violence to impose religious norms. Again, this is at the global level. There's a little bit of good news though, so we should celebrate. Over the long run, the absolute number of religion-related wars and armed conflicts has been in a general decline. In 2019, the Pew Research Center calculated this number to be about 14. But that being said, we need to take a sober reality check and realize the impact that past and current religion-related wars and armed conflicts still have on civilians today. These impacts can be seen in Afghanistan, the Central African Republic, Iraq, Myanmar, and Syria. Now, this information in these contexts are not that new to UN policymakers. In fact, a large majority of these contexts all currently feature or have recently featured on the UN Security Council's agenda. A few of them also currently have UN peace operations present. So the main point I want to make is that the particular lens of religion and belief and its unique role in each conflict as a force for peace and as a less positive force is systematically not being looked at. It's being overlooked at the highest level with Security Council members. And by ignoring this potentially key conflict factor, international policymakers are going to be less likely to find and address the root causes of each unique conflict, because again, each conflict and each atrocity context are unique. There's no one size fits all situation. In terms of some of the main motivators or findings that we found in terms of how religion or belief becomes a dynamic of violent conflict and atrocities, there's three I want to highlight today. One is the use of it to define targets. So this definition of the enemy, creating in-groups and out-groups, using identity-based conflict to motivate it. Other triggers that motivate conflict can include politicization of religious issues, grievances over religious discrimination, religious leaders approving or calling for violence, and a confrontational societal discourse on religion. Other methods that can be strategically used to sustain conflict in the long run is to use religion or belief to justify violence, to gain more allies or combatants, to refresh the combatant pool, or to harness strategically the power and resources of religious infrastructure, which in some cases can be quite significant and vast. So overall, the data and the research shows that we have a growing problem. The question we have in front of us is how do we address it, especially at the global level? We've all heard very compelling descriptions of what is happening on the ground and what are some of the individual risk factors in each context. But what can we do about it? And I think this is where the UN should and has to come in. As the convening organization of the world's government, the UN needs to be addressing these rising trends in violence, because if they're not, then how can we expect or pressure the governments where religion-related violence and atrocities are occurring to in fact play their part in mitigation and prevention? The good news is that there has been some solid groundwork laid in the past 10 years by the UN Human Rights Council, the General Assembly, and the Secretariat. I'll just quickly review these so we can all be on the same page. In 2011, the Human Rights Council passed a landmark resolution, 1618, that laid out an ambitious agenda for how states can take action domestically, so at home, through a huge plethora of actions, which include criminalizing incitement to immediate violence, prohibiting use of religious profiling, and appointing a section of the government to help resolve tensions within and between religious communities. Now, this resolution and this initiative within the Human Rights Council is far from perfect, both in its language and in its current implementation. There are many gaps, but I do think it deserves attention in that it proves that within the UN, a large number of diverse countries can and have reached agreement on preventing and addressing this issue at the thematic level. In 2019, the General Assembly also clearly condemned religion-related violence through a resolution that established the International Day commemorating the victims of acts of violence based on religion or belief, which is to be held annually on August 22nd. We also have a variety of frameworks and plans of action issued by the Secretariat. This notably includes the Framework of Analysis for Atrocity Crimes, which lists risk factors and indicators, both related to religion and not related to religion. But I think we should all take a deep look at the Framework of Analysis. It's quite useful. There's also the UN Plan of Action for religious leaders and actors to prevent incitement to violence that could lead to atrocity crimes, the Strategy and Plan of Action on Hate Speech, which I think in this day and age where hate speech and misinformation and disinformation on social media is becoming ever more prevalent, is all the more relevant and useful for us going forward. And of course, the UN Plan of Action to safeguard religious sites. So despite these positive achievements and tools for ready use within the UN, religion-related violence and conflict is an area that the Security Council has remained officially silent on. And I believe this is a strong and large gap in their action. So that being said, at the informal level, Security Council members have hosted 2 informal meetings on the need to protect religious minorities in conflict in the last 3 years. But again, this issue has never been featured in an official Security Council meeting. So why should the Security Council take action? Why is that important? Why am I talking about it today? One, I think that it could be an easy win in many ways. I do think it could lead to more preventive and effective engagement on situations that the Council already works on. This includes Afghanistan, the Central African Republic, Iraq, Somalia, Syria, to name a few. Again, as I mentioned earlier, it's that the Security Council is not looking at these specific contexts with religion in mind. It doesn't even come into their conflict analysis or threat analysis. And I think this is a big mistake in that they're not fully understanding the full conflict and all the risk factors associated with it. Furthermore, armed conflict, the Security Council's domain, is acknowledged by the UN Framework of Analysis for Atrocity Crimes to be the strongest contributing risk factor for these types of crimes. So who better than the Security Council to take this on? It seems, in light of that, a bit strange that this has been completely left out of the Security Council's body of work. So I would urge the Security Council to take on this thematic area, as I do think it could strengthen its work. It could help identify and it could help the Security Council in identification and monitoring of religion-related early warning indicators, including for conflict and high violence settings that are not already on the Security Council's agenda. There's the opportunity for incorporation of religion and belief into threat analysis efforts where appropriate, which is currently not happening by Security Council members. And of course, all of this would ideally lead to developing more effective political and peace-building strategies. And I completely agree with the other panelists that religion alone is not the end-all be-all. There are many other factors to take into account. But my main point here today is that we cannot forget or exclude or ignore religion. That is not going to help the situation in the slightest. So hopefully all of this will help create a more holistic way that the Security Council would look at conflict and violence going forward and better enable the protection of civilians. I also think it's important that the Security Council pave the way for action that could lead to resolutions and action in non-conflict settings, such as where religion-related mob violence and disorganized violence is sustained over time. Examples include Ethiopia, India, Syria. But of course, before taking action, you need to be mindful of potential risks. because there are always risks, especially within the political organization of the United Nations. Some of these risks include the weakening of universal human rights norms, specifically if the action that's endorsed or promoted does not maintain human rights standards and law. I think it's integral, I'm sure everyone here on the call agrees, that human rights are treated as non-negotiable. There's also the potential risk of politicization of religious issues, especially within the UN Security Council. And I think a UN member state who wanted to take on this call to action that I'm giving out would be best served by finding like-minded countries such as the International Contact Group on Freedom of Religion or Belief, which is a grouping of diverse countries at the UN that has been most successful in staying apolitical, I think thanks to their human rights-based approach. There's also the potential for marginalizing further non-Abrahamic religions and beliefs. I think within the United Nations systems, a lot of action and talk around religion and belief happens to center around the Abrahamic religions. And it's unfortunate that this happens, and we need to actively counter it and make sure we're being fully inclusive in our language. Those usually left out of this conversation or analysis include indigenous, animist, humanist, atheist, and those with secular beliefs. Lastly, the last potential risk factor I want to highlight today is that focusing on religion shouldn't be done if it is to the detriment of other human rights. For example, gender rights. Unfortunately, some countries have used religion to justify discrimination due to gender and sexuality. So to combat that, I think it's important that we continue to mainstream the discussion of women, girls, and LGBTQ+ persons into dialogue on religion, not separating it out, as sometimes tends to be the case. So lastly, I just want to conclude with some thoughts and options for Security Council action related to religion and belief. What could the Security Council do that would have the most meaningful impact and that would best address and prevent violence connected to religion and belief and atrocities? First and foremost, I think we have to consider the option of a resolution. And this could come in two main ways. It could be a thematic overarching umbrella setting resolution or a country or country-specific resolution. If the Security Council were to take on a thematic resolution, I think it'd be essential that they define the problem and connect it to international peace and security, condemn rising and sustained violence and atrocities related to religion and belief, and call on member states to build up their capacity to prevent and address religion-related violence. And a good starting place for this would be the UN Human Rights Council Resolution 1618. And I think it's also essential that the Security Council enhance monitoring and reporting to the Council in this thematic area, as is currently not happening. This could happen through a variety of different ways. One would be for Security Council members to request a briefing from the Special Advisor to the Secretary General on genocide prevention in order to best understand how to use the risk indicators related to religion from the UN framework of analysis for atrocity crimes. The Security Council could also ask for a new section in the Secretary General's country-specific reports for contexts where there are high levels of this type of violence, or even better, a new section in the Secretary General's protection of civilians in armed conflict annual reports. In terms of a country-specific resolution, I think it would be essential to call to attention the role of religious tensions or actors in what they play in perpetuating that specific conflict. Again, every conflict is unique. And always drawing special attention to atrocity crimes. Realistically, in terms of the politics of the Security Council, I do believe it would be most viable to focus on a context, at least for the first resolution of this type, where a non-state actor is the main perpetrator of religious violence and atrocities. And this would, as I'm sure we all know, most easily be done with a recognized terrorist group, ISIS, Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab. Nigeria, as has already been stated today, is a particularly interesting choice for a country-specific resolution. As has already been highlighted, there are a variety of different conflicts ongoing in the country with different implications and connections to religion and belief. And unfortunately, the Security Council has been completely negligent and not discussing Nigeria, except in the context of Boko Haram. And I think it deserves greater attention, not to give greater attention to the terrorists there, but to aid in supporting the country in moving forward and away from these conflicts. Two last ideas, and then I'll let us move to the discussion. I also think if we want to make this a sustainable part of the Security Council's agenda and really incite problem solving and integration and a holistic approach of how we address conflicts and atrocities, it's important that religion and belief be connected to current Security Council agendas and resolutions. This could easily be done through the insertion of preambulatory language and resolutions. This could happen in relation to the protection of civilians agenda, women, peace and security, protection of cultural heritage, children in armed conflict, counterterrorism, and violent extremism. It's quite a long list of options. I also think there's opportunity to mainstream the religion lens into peace operation mandates. Unfortunately, except for a word here or there, religion has completely been left out of the analysis and background context that goes into these mandates for peace operations. And so, for example, the Security Council could mandate peace operations where religion and belief plays a factor in conflict and peace, to consider religious identity, religious tensions, or minority groups in early warning indicators, threat analysis, and political and peace building strategies. And as was stated earlier, but I'm going to repeat it because I think it deserves repeating, it is essential that when we engage religious and belief leaders in peace building, we include women, LGBTQ+, and minority religious leaders. We won't be able to achieve peace in any context in the world without them. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to a very rich discussion.
Thank you so much, Julie.